The American Revolution. You know the story, right? A scrappy bunch of rebels goes up against a global superpower. But when you really dig into the facts, their victory seems, well, almost impossible. In this explainer, we're going to break down how the colonists actually pulled it off.
And that's the real question, isn't it? On one side, you have the American colonies, disorganized, broke, and barely a country. And on the other, the British Empire, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world at the time. So how on earth did David beat Goliath? First things first, we gotta really wrap our heads around just how stacked the deck was against the Americans. I mean, the odds weren't just long, they were borderline impossible. The difference between the two was just staggering. Great Britain had a professional, full-time army and the most powerful navy on the planet. They had a strong central government and a booming economy to pay for it all. The colonies, they had a patchwork of local militias, no real navy to speak of, very little cash, and 13 separate governments that couldn't seem to agree on what to have for lunch, let alone how to run a war. And, it wasn't just a money problem. The colonies weren't even on the same page. We have this image of everyone united against the crown, but the reality was way messier. You're looking at maybe a third of the colonists who were all-in patriots. Another third were loyalists. They wanted to stay British. And the rest? They just wanted to be left alone.
60,000. That's roughly how many loyalists actually picked up a gun and fought for the British. Think about that. This wasn't just a revolution against a king thousands of miles away. It was America's first civil war. It was neighbor fighting neighbor, and the British were experts at using those divisions to their advantage.
So with odds like that, how do you even begin to fight? Well, it took a really brilliant change in strategy, led by George Washington. It was a strategy of basically winning by not losing. You can just feel the frustration in Washington's own words here. He was in despair over his troops. They were poorly armed, poorly trained. He knew right from the jump that trying to fight the British in big open field battles was just a recipe for getting wiped out. Their army was just too good. So he pivoted. Washington figured out that he didn't have to win every battle. He just had to keep his army from being destroyed. The goal was to drag the war out, make it super expensive for the British, and basically wear them down until they lost the political will to keep fighting an endless war so far from home. It was all about outlasting them. And the Battle of Trenton is the perfect example of this. By the end of 1776, morale was at rock bottom. The whole revolution was hanging by a thread. So Washington's insane gamble, crossing the icy Delaware on Christmas to launch a surprise attack, was everything. Militarily, it was a small win, but for morale, it was huge. It proved they could still fight, and it kept the flicker of hope alive. But look, a strategy like that is only as good as the soldiers who have to live it. And that brings us to the second key to victory, the American soldier. Their sheer grit was the engine that made this whole war of attrition possible. I mean, the conditions they had to put up with were just horrific. They were barely paid, if at all, they were short on food, their clothes were falling apart, and they had to survive brutal winters like the famous one at Valley Forge. And yet, thousands of them stayed. They were driven by this powerful idea of liberty, and that belief turned them into a tough, seasoned fighting force. The British were also playing hardball, trying to turn America's greatest weakness against itself. Lord Dunmore's proclamation was a shrewd move. It offered freedom to any enslaved person who escaped their patriot owner and joined the British Army. It was designed to cause chaos and give the British more troops. 5,000. That's about how many black soldiers ended up fighting for the Continental Army. See, the American response was really born out of necessity. After first banning them, the Army started recruiting black men, both free and enslaved, promising freedom for their service. Their contribution was absolutely vital. They helped counter the British strategy and strengthened the American cause, all while fighting for a promise of freedom that the new nation would, sadly, struggle to keep. Okay, so you've got a smart strategy and a resilient army. But that still doesn't solve the massive gap in money and supplies. For that, the Americans needed friends in high places. And this is where clever diplomacy turned a colonial uprising into a full-blown world war. You've got Benjamin Franklin over in Paris working his magic on the French court. But they were on the fence. They didn't want to back a loser. The big turning point was the American victory at Saratoga in 1777. That was the proof Franklin needed. It showed France that, hey, these colonists might actually win this thing. But let's be real about why France jumped in. It wasn't because they were big fans of American independence. No, this was cold, hard geopolitics. For France, this was the perfect chance to get some payback and weaken their old enemy, Great Britain, after a humiliating defeat in the 7 Years' War. And the French support was a total game changer.
We're talking money, guns, and thousands of professional soldiers. But the most important thing they brought to the party? Their navy. All of a sudden, Britain wasn't just fighting some colonists anymore. With France, Spain, and Holland getting involved, it was a global war, and Britain's forces were stretched thin all over the world.
And this is where it all comes to a head. The Battle of Yorktown in 1781 is the climax. It's the moment where every single one of these factors, Washington's leadership, the hardened army, and that critical French alliance, all came together perfectly.
So here's how the trap was sprung. The British general, Cornwallis, backs his army into Yorktown, Virginia, thinking he can get resupplied by the British Navy. Big mistake. The French fleet sailed in and took control of the coast, cutting off his only escape route. At the exact same time, Washington's American and French forces marched down and surrounded him by land. Cornwallis was completely trapped.
His surrender was the knockout punch. Sure, a little bit of fighting continued here and there, but this was the moment that really ended it. Back in London, the political will to keep paying for this long, expensive, and now losing war just evaporated. Peace talks started pretty quickly after that. So when you step back and look at the whole picture, the American victory wasn't just one thing. It was this powerful combination, this perfect storm of factors that came together against all the odds. So this was the winning formula, right? You had Washington's brilliant don't lose strategy. You had the unbelievable grit of the soldiers, including the vital role played by thousands of Black patriots. And none of it, absolutely none of it would have been possible without that game-changing help from their allies, especially the French. Which really leaves us with this thought. When you consider all of it, the lack of money, the deep divisions, the sheer might of the British Empire, what does this unbelievable victory tell you about the power of an idea? And maybe just as important, what does it tell you about the simple strategic power of just refusing to give up?